the industry. So I am a naval engineer, so I am concerned about this efficiency. And I think that the best thing it is to spend less energy. And with this brief introduction, I'm going to ask Diego. You can start. Can you hear me? Good afternoon, everyone. What happened with that lunch? I think it was too heavy. As you can see, I am from Colombia. What a Colombian would ask after lunch. Did you have a? Did you have a coffee? I think you haven't had a coffee. As Raul said, what is the goal of this first section? And not only from the maritime perspective, but also from the commercial perspective, what it is, this perspective for 2026 in the Latin American region. And for this, it is that I want to say thank you to Gaston and all the people here in this event, organizers. It's a pleasure to share on this panel. And I also like to start my presentation with this question. What is your perspective for 2026? What is going to happen in commercial terms? 2025 in comparison to 2026 is going to be a difficult process. Raise your hands if you think that is going to be a better year than last one. Very few of you. And who expected to have a worse year? Let's say bad, worse than 2025. Two. And the rest, why didn't you raise your hands? It depends. And I ask this question because at the beginning of this year, I asked the same question in several conferences. What do you expect to get from 2025? Is it going to be an easy, difficult year? And it was not that bad as we expected to have in terms of tariffs. We have been talked a lot about it, but it hasn't been that bad in this area. Always you have to be that present, or you have to have that present because the human being, it is oriented in paying attention to the bad side, the risk, and not to focuses in the opportunities. So part of my presentation is to provide a context and not only the noise, but what are the real implications and how this relates to decarbonization. So let's start. What it is the forecast for Latin America in 2026 and what is the rhythm of decarbonization in a tariff world? I'd like to start with this image that shows the projection of growth in Latin America. And you can see that Latin America, it's growing bigger than other developed markets. But when you compare ourselves with Asia, we are growing slower. And there are a lot of factors that prevents us from that. I mean, one factor is the productivity. And when we compare Latin America with the productivity of the Southeast of Asia, just for you to know, because this is interesting for us to share, since the 60s, and we had this study of the productivity per different experiences. This is the annual productivity in the East South of Asia grew 51 points, and in Latin America, it grew 0.01%. This is a topic that it's always been affected in Latin America, and decarbonization here. I want to get to I want to be efficient, I want to be more productive, I want to spend less. And that is basically the message that we have been promoting. So how this has an impact in my pocket and maybe Alexis can talk about that too. So, what are the growing factors in Latin America in the next few years? I am in Chile and I have to talk about this, but in the rest of Latin America, the governments are going to go towards the right wing, and sometimes the left governments do not work as good as we think. And I'm talking about politics in a form like this, because when we talk about governments of the right wing, the terms of regulation and agility of the process, and to reduce the permissions and to I mean, to get a permit in Chile, it's so complicated. And specifically for projects that want to be done in 20, 30 years. So a government from the right wing has that mentality. How can I reduce the government to be more efficient? And I think that America Latina is going to migrate to that perspective from left, right, right, left. And that is what we expect for the next year. Now, let's compare Latin America exclusively in 2026 with the rest of the regions. And if you see the yellow bar, the average in 10 years, 2009 and 2019, there is something interesting. It's growing more and than the last decade. This decade, I mean, because in the last decade we still had a lot of problems of infrastructure, but something that has improved, it is something that it is related to decarbonization, is digitalization of the processes, and that digitalization has allowed the industry of the services and maritime, land, logistics, it's more efficient through digitalization and investment in the reduction of the carbon footprint. What are we expecting for 2026? We are going to have the possibility to grow 2.1%, that it's over the US than the EU. And it opens a lot of doors for our um, side of the business and the industry. There is appetite to invest in a lot of projects in Brazil, in Central America, in the Caribbean. Definitely, that attracts the foreign investment. It is something that the region has to continue working on. Now, I like to talk about the trading and imports about that. Because because America Latina, it depends on the import, because Brazil and Mexico are the only ones that have an internal a big production. And I'm talking a little bit about decarbonization here, because it's so to to import more, you have to decarbonize more. If I import more than I sell, that has a long-term consequence. But if I export more, I have a bigger possibility to buy and I generate wealth. And in Latin America, the capacity of the port infrastructure is not efficient, is not optimal to export and to sell more. And from that perspective, we can bring better equipment that allow us to be more productive, and we can, in this way, decarbonize quickly. So how can I be more efficient and more productive? And then in this graph, you can realize that in Latin America, we have lower imports in almost, if you compare it to everyone else, is one of the lowest. And this is why we need decarbonization. And these are key aspects for the retrofit of the ships. And he's going to tell us a little bit about that. But it's fundamental for us to have this capacity to sell more. And here we are going to talk about the view of commercial terms for Latin America, and in terms of millions of dollars in productivity, this is the growth of the region. Brazil and Argentina, the main engines of growth in dollars in the region. Brazil, despite of all the tariffs with the US, it has had an impact. The sales of coffee and meat and other products. Of course, we have a deceleration with the trade in the US, but they have started to sell to China and their commercial relations have been diversified. And now talking about the tariffs, what is the strategy in the world? It is actually, let's get diverse, let's get out. In the case of Chile, we can find diversification in the strategy in India and China. So if you ask me about this impact in Latin America, for example, the tariffs, the minimum is actually the impact in the Chilean case is minimum because of the diversification. And this is also helping us to see where we are going to have the decarbonization projects, because where you have a bigger growth in international trade, you are going to have more investment that is going to be translated in the return. I'm not only asking about growing, but also giving a little bit back. And this is to understand where the future projects are coming. And this topic of the import, I'm not going to discuss this. I just want to tell you a little bit about Amish. I know that lunch was long, but what is AMI? And I will tell you a little bit about me. American Marketing Intelligence. It's a company that is in charge of advising logistic global companies and in other sectors also to they help them to make strategic decisions. And the presentation that I providing, generally we do it to these customers in their strategic planning sessions. What do we have to do in the next 5 years? Tell us what are the trends in Latin America, what it's going to happen for the decisions and the plans to have more clarity. And concretely what we do, for you to have a clear idea what it is marketing intelligence, and it's like marketing, kind of. Yes and no. What do? We help our customers to grow in their business. How do you want to make your business to grow in the logistic world? Now, for example, if you want to grow in Argentina or in Mexico, expansion investment projects. So what it is the potential of the demand on of this country with this product, and we do this kind of study for our customers. How do we protect our business? Basically, protect means that if I am a company that is established in Latin America, what my competition is doing to gain market share, what are they going to do in terms of the decarbonization, and how do we measure that? Basically, it is maybe you have heard the market study that it is to measure how big it is the market, what are the sales, what is the sales projection, what it is the project participation. And I would like to, well, that was just a general perspective because through these, we collect the insights that I am sharing with you today. This is how we did it. And I'm going to finish to go towards the decarbonization topic before we end. This slide, I like it because it's going to provide a lot of context to this talk. Despite of tariffs and rhetorics that we are hearing here, I'll tell you that the trade in the North America region, if we consider Canada, US, and Mexico, grew 1% in the last in the first months of 2025. If we see the volume, it was contracted in 2%, not as everyone was forecasting. Everyone said 25, 30%, but on the rest of the world, the trade expanded 4%. So that is also very important to see it from the perspective of decarbonization tariffs, how that impacts the projects of the companies, because actually this is also talking about the investment. Roberto was going to talk about this. I'm going to use this space going to make my best effort to replace him because he's irreplaceable. So he's going to tell us about the price, what is going to happen to the maritime coal, or actually carbon. And we have in the next few weeks a very important meeting where this global price is going to be defined. So we have heard that the US is going to be against this, and also they have threatened other countries, if you vote in favor here, you are going to have tariffs. So what is the implication if the US is imposing these kind of measures? And to see it with a little bit of detail, first, my perspective and the people's perspective that I have discussed, difficult it is that US can derail this process in the medium term, because in politics we talk about 4 years, and it's a little bit tense, the side of decarbonization and these kind of measures in the US. But in some cases, we have projects for 20, 30 years, and those projects are, of course, going to go directing towards a more efficient process. And if we find this scenario of world compliance, it's difficult for them to say, no, US is not asking me this, so I will not do it. But what happens with the rest of the countries that are going to take in those measures? So we have this long-term plan. If you see beyond rhetorics, of course, US is not going to be able to stop completely this project. In this moment, we have a government shutdown, and our president Trump is quite concerned about that, so he takes a few weeks. And in that way, we can have the meeting IMO, we can have this meeting in a quiet environment. Definitely, this is going to be approved. And with this meeting, I have more slides, but I don't want to bore you more with my presentation. Raul or Alexis, I don't know who is coming now. Thank you.
Recording stopped.
¿Cuánto tiempo tenemos nos dieron 15 minutos. Ok, nos dieron un gap, ¿no? Para, sí, aquí hay actores interesantes.
Recording in progress.
Claro, pregunta. Vamos 10 minutos y después dejamos otros 5 o 10.
Then you present 10 minutes, and then we have 10 more minutes for questions. It is quite complex to explain what is going to happen, because the initiatives here, I mean, to set the baseline of the footprint where we are now, is the how and when we are going to understand that this transition is happening over time. What is the fuel with the right technology? And with this, I will give you heads up. We do not have just one fuel. We are going to have a mixture of fuels and technologies. The detail here is when these components are going to come into play. And we are going to see this from the economical perspective and globally. And also, what's of the other very important challenges in Latin America is to talk about this list. We are talking about the macroeconomic numbers that are going to be generated. This is not going to stop. We are going to need more infrastructure. And when we talk about the logistics sector, has about 5% of the the maritime produces 3% of the global emissions, and all the rest, aviation, land transportation, and railways are part of this percentage. So we have still a great number of actions to activate in this maritime world, because only two sectors are regulated at the international level, maritime and aviation, because of their two organizations in charge. And also we have this other factor of negotiation at a more bilateral and national aspects that are not regulated and there are countries. And then we have complexities here, but also we have opportunities. One of the points that I was mentioning as to some colleagues in the lunchtime is that our vision as the Navy as a shipping company, we have a change of goals, not only from the perspective of the maritime fuel, but all those technological needs that are going to be given to the logistics services that basically are land transportation, um, loads, shipments, storage, or where we move through railways, and also the other topic it is the terminal. So all these technologies
Que va a darse en la necesidad de estos factores y la importancia por el cual muchas de las regulaciones que vamos a conversar posteriormente son necesarias que ya entren en vigor,
Recording in
porque todos estos
progress.
proyectos que vemos en este footprint necesitan una planificación y llevan un tiempo de construcción y diseño. Yendo a la parte principal o a la parte que conversábamos, el tema de cómo el transporte marítimo ha evolucionado. Generalmente, a partir del año 2011 se adoptó la primera regulación internacional en materia de descarbonización del transporte. Esto llevó a cabo un análisis, un balance entre lo que eran medidas de eficiencias hacia un cambio tecnológico de nuevos combustibles. En efecto, desde el 2011 fueron entrando en vigor.
since 2011, we have different regulations that were enabled from the perspective of OPEX. So we can see how we can improve the operation of the ships. And most of the projects, depending on the sector, we have a maximum point of efficiency. And this is something that is being discussed today. However, today, with this vision moving forward, we decided to make this change. I mean, we have these ships with dual fuel that so we can break the paradigm, or I mean, it doesn't need to be one thing or the other first, infrastructure or the shipment. So we said here we have the shipments, and we started since 2010 with some containers, and today we have shipments that are more than 278,000 containers. Every shipment of 17,000 that they can use by fuel.
Until the next orders for the bugs and the ships that we have ready. Okay, and everything that we have is a demand of fuel, and it's part of what's going on because this has one of the most important powers. Because this comes with the capacity that is fuels and the capacity as well. That is something very interesting that in other matters we got to know that. But this is brand new, and this is the analysis of the life cycle. And of course, the regulations that we have in October is going to be one of the critical points that we have of the fuel, because we are talking about ethanol grade that works from some years ago. We've been working with that lately, and is part of the gray methanol. It's similar to the conventional fuel. So what then? We have some important things that are part of the complication, and that's something that needs to be taken into account. This is an analysis that I love to introduce, and this is quite simple. This is the reason why don't we use that technology, and that's part of the standardization, and it's part of this project that cannot be introduced or will not be introduced, that has that is something that is feasible and that will not get us what we want. So we're getting into a technology. Uh, this gave us the experience because what are we going to do? How are we doing the cost and the environmental, the type of fuel that we're going to use? When we talk about technology, heavy technology, it is the heavy duty truck and the heavy trucks. We're talking about some important containers. The cost of doing something about that is near the diesel, is near this electrical change. And the biofuel doesn't have to be an option. This can happen. Uh, like what to use, what to do. I mean, precisely is the feedstock something to take into account because this is going to change and this is going to play on the things that we are going to do. And what to do with this analysis is precisely part of what's going on with each of these subjects. Why do I introduce that? Because before supporting that, what what is going to happen? All these analyses are important to performed, and this is part of the need to take that because that offer is going to be near in the moving on of the projects of the commitment because this is regulatory. And in the year 2027, we're going to have an investment because it's part of the energy on this subject matter. And we have to have that very clear. This is very difficult to obtain that at a long term. And it is part of a contract and something that we are moving on because we still have it. This is going to happen, and this is where we need to do the financial engineering that is economic to develop these projects, taking into account that
tomando las ventajas, pero también entendiendo que el volumen
Recording
que se
in
necesita
progress.
para este tipo de embarcaciones o este tipo de nuevas tecnologías es alto y que necesitas no solamente en muchos de los casos tenerlo en diferentes áreas o regiones. Entonces,
areas. When we are going to do, we have stopped researching some of the fuels. We are performing those because one of the first fuels that we're doing and we do with the first orders is the methanol. And all the analysis of all the fuels, even batteries that are electrical, we are analyzing all of that, and that is inside the table. Because as it has been mentioned at the very beginning, there's no unique solution to work with all the sea transportation. So, therefore, part of the critical things that we're going to do with the analysis of the cycle life is part of the steps that we are going to have, and is a certification. Is the risk of having a fuel that makes the claim, as we say, of the attributes and the fuel of a life cycle that is different to the one that we are looking for. Therefore, what to do and why is it important the decision taking for the next months to come? Because when we take the decision, this decision, we are not going to initiate the equality of the prices. So they gap that gap. They deal, uh, deal with that gap. So it's part of the region. Uh, it's something that we are going to work on. And the mixture and the next weeks, when we have the this date established for the 2027, these fuels they're going to have a regulation that is steady and that is a difference between And very important thing. The second thing, we're going to have an analysis on the life cycle.
El tanque hasta donde se quema, sino que ahí ya va a estar establecido que lo vamos a medir todo desde el punto de
We're
producción.
going to measure that from the production point and to the current block. And third, going to be with an ambition is what we believe on the sea system and what we have tested so far. The regulation is the one that we are going to work with. Not the demand of a customer and not the demand of any other thing that we are working with and what makes us believe in the system. We need that level of demand, and that is something that needs to be uh, dealt with. So let's go to the questions here. We can discuss some things, please. We're going to have a couple of images and the vision that we have for some the boats, and then let's work on the session of questions. Basically, I'm an engineer and I work with boats. This is about like how to consume less energy. Let us think that we are working with energy. That's a reality, but of course I have to make that this less energy is consumed. And for that, the designs of some boats, we're worried about the energetic efficiency on the designs and the best lines to have, and also the equipments and the sea areas to see if we can work on that ideas. So that's the idea. And the other thing, what about that? What about because we have the reduction of two ways, the green ones and the engineering and the methane and the green hydrogen and the that's part of idea. And we have some other measures that is part of the reduction and the shore power. This is a matter of getting with the auxiliary areas. This is something that captures the emissions. What about that? I mean, this captures CO2 to then be able to trend it and to like these different uses. The efficiency and the board of directors to improve that, and this is part of the graph and the next three things of the velocimeter, because this is basically what we're going to do for the Mar del Plata. We don't have much fuel, and what we need to do is look for the economic speed. And if we have to get there faster, we're going to spend more money. So the smart speed reduction is one of the ways to reduce the energy. Another thing that is there on the right, they seem to be quite interesting how the sea engineers we copy the nature to look for ways to reduce uh, one of the most efficient animals. And this is because in their skin, when it comes out to the surface, they work with other things, and that is going to generate a lubrication that stops in a laminar layer, and this is going to allow to reduce the pressure. And then again, we are moving on because the wind on the engines is going to produce a 12 and 13%. What's going on here in the region? In a region, what we are doing when we have the fuel and everything, at least by now for several years, the mixture of the methanol is going to put us in a competitive and economic position favorable for these alternatives. And in burn, where the CO2 that is mixed with the biomethane, we get that and we get near zero. But also the other ones, all the different measures as these purees and other type of materials we achieve to generate these part of reductions and scenarios. And what about these considerations? We probably around the 40% of energy that we use in the sea transportation is going to be generic. And then the University of Buenos Aires, we study to solve things that are specific on a region. And one of them was the containers that were between the island, that is on the most southern part, and the sea transportation. The sea transportation that deals with the level of the most important things and the options that are part of that level of support. In the case of dragados, we use and we know that GLL combined with bio-DNL, producing this energy is part of the second area of this part of the world, and we achieve therefore the cost. We are looking always for a way to achieve these three solutions: sustainability, and inclusion. And in a project, always these three things: the sustainable guides. So this is part of what's going on. And so, what about the other option? We are planning here the option of the energy, and we wait for the fishing industry to make it more part of what's going on the area and the biomethane to mix it out and the reduction that it's part of the steel and what's going on with that and the emissions of the boats. What about these other things? The sea transportation is one of the precisely the highest area when we have gas in the region, and this allows to replace the truck that is currently the way we deal with that. And the idle way is the best thing that we can do. I would like to tell you about uh, how to do the with the decarbonization. If we take the production of the GNL of Trinidad Tobago, we mix a 12% of biogas generated with the near of the 16% of what we have in Dominican Republic and Haiti, and we take this at Gathon, and we this is going to generate with this generation of the sufficient area of the biogas and the CNL that will allow to have zero emissions on the sea transportation and save $600,000 and generate others. So when we look for the solution, we think we can think about the problems to solve in the region and how we're going to improve the life of people and to make it more competitive, right? Taking profit of the resources. Thank you so much for your attention. We don't have time because another panel is coming. Thank you so much for the participation of the panelists.